This isn't a joke. If you rewatch Shrek 2, you might find yourself saying, this is great, this is hilarious, I love this. And even if you're not writing an animated film, this still might be good to watch because the film embraces 3 powerful traits in crafting an effective climax. We're gonna look at those 3 traits right now. So number 1, it's the peak of all conflict. This might seem super simple, but I can't tell you how many films I've covered that miss this mark. Probably most of them actually miss this because when people think of conflict, they usually think of the external. They think of physical obstacles, maybe an antagonist, or just barriers that are put in place to keep the protagonist from reaching their goal. But conflict isn't only external. If you really have a good story, then there should also be internal conflict as well. And if you provide a peak of this internal and external conflict at one point, that features a protagonist going through the heights of their emotional journey, their internal arc, whatever that may be, then not only could your climax be visually spectacular, but it'll also be very emotionally resonant, and that's what we're going for here. So let's look at this climax in Shrek 2.
Hit it!
In the film, the heroes face off against the largest external obstacles they've faced so far, from leagues of soldiers to catapults, to a ticking clock of Fiona kissing Prince Charming, to the fairy godmother releasing her full magical fury. But on top of this, Shrek also has to face the internal possibility of losing his true love forever. All his self-consciousness and feeling that he can never truly be her Prince Charming that has been developing throughout the film, and even in the first film, reach their height at this point, especially when he sees her kissing Prince Charming. He tries desperately to reconnect with his love, and for a moment has to confront the reality that he's too late, and will have to return to the fate and loneliness he now fears. For a further example of this, let's look how Inception achieves the same thing. Yes, I'm comparing Inception to Shrek 2. Obviously, the external conflict in the third act is at its peak, but things really get interesting and impactful when Cobb is faced with the absolute height of his internal conflict. He must officially give up the projection of his deceased wife, despite wanting more than anything to be together again. Now let's look at number 2. The climax ends the character arcs of several major characters. If you really want to craft a climax that's memorable and gives the viewers that feeling of escalation and emotion that so much is happening, the more character arcs you can complete, the better. Quick pause to just define what I mean by character arc. When I say character arc, I just mean the character's journey, beginning, middle, and end. Of course, the protagonist is the main character arc, the main source of adventure and conflict, where the theme originates as the protagonist transforms. But your supporting characters as well should probably have their own character arcs. If at least a couple of your supporting characters don't have mini arcs throughout the story, then they just become a little flat and boring and forgettable. So let's look back at what Shrek 2 does in its climax, because they go a little crazy with finishing up multiple character arcs, and it's funny and effective, and it leads to a very high octane finale. First, we have the Gingerbread Man. His arc is short, but hilarious. In an earlier scene, he's painted as a sort of Dr. Frankenstein-like character when he helps create Mongo, the giant gingerbread man. It's implied that he's emotionally attached to Mongo as his creator, even though he knows he's only being created for one purpose, to break into Far Far Away Castle. Once Mongo is destroyed, the gingerbread man ends his arc weeping over his creation with an ultimate sense of tragic catharsis. Obviously, this moment is meant to be over the top and tongue-in-cheek, but it's still effective in elevating the sense of energy. Next, we have Puss in Boots. After being spared by Shrek, Puss commits himself to repaying his debts to Shrek. It's his new creed anchored by his sense of honor. In the climax, he's finally given the opportunity to risk his life for Shrek and repay his debts.
Today, I repay my debt.
Simultaneously, King Harold sacrifices himself in order to ensure his daughter keeps her true love, despite wanting her to have a Prince Charming throughout. Concluding several character arcs in the climax works great for big franchise films or fantasies, but it could also work really well in more character-based dramas and comedies. Okay, last but not least, another obvious one, number 3, make it flashy. This is probably the main thing people think about when they picture a finale and a climax, something big and loud and a spectacle. If you're already providing a height of external and internal conflict as well as finishing up some character arcs, then it's already going to be flashy in some ways. But there's still a couple of tricks and interesting things you could consider just to make sure that this ending climax is as climactic as you want it to be. The most obvious thing Shrek 2 does that not everyone has access to is it puts the sequence to the song I Need a Hero. But it also does some other things that are more universal and could probably work in whatever you're writing. For instance, it rapidly intercuts between scenes. It cuts right when an important shift happens in one location, then goes to the other until another shift happens, then back to the original location, and so on. These short intercut scenes that end on mini cliffhangers really keep viewers like you and me on the edge of their seats. Something else it does, and you don't have to do this, but a lot of stories do this, is that the sequence disrupts a major event. Having a big event or ceremony in the climax where guests are meant to be entertained or professional, then disrupting it with the hero's quest is a great way to end with a bang and show that the protagonist's journey is way more important than this big lavish event where everyone has clear expectations of how people are supposed to behave. Whether the ceremony is a wedding or a church service or a performance, these major events allow the sequence to further stand out from previous scenes and have the added stakes of being watched by a public crowd. And lastly, I want to mention one really cool trick, probably my favorite in crafting a climax. It might be more on the side of the director or the production team, but if used correctly, this could really take your climax to a whole new level, reintroducing a musical track or musical theme that has been used in other parts of the story into the climax in a slightly different or more epic way can really blow viewers' minds. Pixar does this all the time, and sometimes it's so subtle that viewers don't even notice, but they feel that connection to the entire journey and start bawling their eyes out. It's subtle in the climax of Shrek 2, but there's a moment where you could still hear the main Shrek theme interwoven into the I Need a Hero track. Pixar's most recent film, Luca, now streaming on Disney+, has a climax that I really enjoyed. Not only does it incorporate all of these qualities, but it also plays with Dan Romer's beautiful score in a really effective way. Now, this movie just came out, so I don't want to spoil it with clips not seen in the trailer, but if you watch it, really pay attention to the music that's used in the traumatic All Is Lost moment, how that theme transforms in the finale, and what it ultimately becomes in the final scene. So I hope this breakdown was helpful in explaining why people love Shrek 2, especially the ending. It's not just a joke, it's not just about meme culture, but the admiration is actually based on the fact that this film has a really good storytelling fundamentals and executes the climax excellently at the end.